So, okay, welcome again, Nigel. Nigel from Arington's. We're just picking up on where we left off before. So, welcome again.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks for having me along.
You're welcome. And then get your crystal ball out. What's going to happen in the future in Brighton and that area? So, if we hadn't had this pandemic at the moment, what's your feeling on lettings in the Brighton area, either students versus rental, or whatever?
Tackling the student market, because obviously I think that's probably the market that's most affected in reality. I think the residential market is, pretty well let, and where tenants are in properties, obviously they're staying in those properties unless they need to move. So you've got the standard people that need to move rather than the want to move in the residential market. So it's a bit of a slower market in terms of properties renting, but you've got longer tenancy periods. So that's the residential market. It's reasonably stable. The student market is more unstable, obviously, because of everything that's going on, and obviously it's a shorter commitment for the students. If we didn't have the COVID-19 at the moment, it was going to be an interesting market this year anyway. What with all the additional accommodation coming online for the first years, and both Sussex and Brighton obviously hoping to house all of their first year students, or certainly looking to, it was certainly going to affect the student market in Brighton. The number of properties obviously that we have in Brighton available now for students, and my feeling was it was going to affect the 1 and 2 bedroom properties more than the traditional HMOs. The traditional HMOs in the core centre, desirable areas, so down the Lewis Road, close to the universities, around the Coombe Road, all of those areas, are still going to let, as long as they're maintained reasonably. They're still in a good location in between the town and the university, and they're desirable for students. The ones further out, so maybe out in Coldine, etc., they may struggle a bit more, Morscombe. They may struggle a bit more just because they'll be less desirable for the HMOs. But it was, again, the 1 and 2 beds I felt were going to start struggling a bit this year, with the obviously reduced numbers of the students coming to both Brighton and Sussex this year, and the reduction of international students as well, which traditionally take the 1 and 2 beds.
Right. So are you warning your landlords to have a plan B?
Right. Well, so with COVID-19, it's changed the market.
Completely locked you up.
Yeah. Thankfully, we had let near enough all our HMOs pre-COVID-19, and would let a good number of the 2 beds as well. So thankfully, we don't have a huge number of properties left available to let, and they are gradually ticking off. They're ticking through. We are still having viewings. People are still taking those properties. So thankfully for us, we seem to be running along reasonably normally, and the tenants that have already signed up and agreed are committing and signing the legally binding tenancy agreements. So they are committing to those tenancies. So we're not getting many fallouts at all. But obviously it is taking a lot of conversations, a lot of extra work with the tenants, with the guarantors, etc., and just discussing with all of them the circumstances, and what they think is going to happen in the next year. For the properties that are left on the market, I think we're going to see tricky times ahead. Last night in the news, we heard some good news, possibly that universities are allowed to accept an additional 5%, which may see an increase in students coming to Sussex. I believe Brighton were struggling to fill their places anyway, but we might see an increase to Sussex. Again, whether I don't know the exact figures, but whether they'll be able to house all those additional first years or not, I don't entirely know. But there may be some overflow from those into the traditional accommodation, which would obviously help and benefit landlords. I think we're going to see sort of 2 or 3 flows of tenants now coming to the market. One, we've got the few that are actually trying to get ahead of the game now, and they're trying to view properties and take their property now, on the basis that they will be coming back to university in September. Whether the campus is open or not, they will physically come back to Brighton, and therefore they want to try and get the good properties that are still available now. I think once lockdown is released, then obviously we're seeing another flow of students starting to come back, looking for their properties for the September time. The next one will be once the campuses actually confirm when they're physically opening and what their plans are. And that will then affect the international students as to when they will look. Because if they say that they're obviously doing online courses through till January, for example, then we may see a delay in those international students coming back to the housing market until January. So again, as always, as I advise our landlords, your property needs to be a good, clean, presentable, tidy property that is going to be attractive to students. Keep on top of your maintenance. If you've got any tenancies that are ending early in July, for example, then maybe this is a great time to take advantage of that and do some updates, do some maintenance to the property, because you might have a few weeks downtime now. And then just try and make sure that your property is the one that stands out. Keep a close eye on the market, keep a close eye on what the other letting agents and landlords are doing to attract their tenants in. We're not seeing huge reductions in prices at the moment, but we are seeing some landlords and agents just doing price reductions, just trying to catch those tenants. But again, with tenants and student tenants, it's always going to be location and quality. And that's what they're after. And obviously, budget wise, and just making sure they can get the best location and quality for their budget.
And should your landlords be looking forward a year to say, well, everything's probably okay for a year, but this time next year we should be thinking completely different again, or just leave it and see how the year goes?
Again, a very difficult question. Thanks, Peter.
Well, if we could answer that, we'd all be multi-millionaires.
Okay, so we've got an additional 5% potentially coming to the universities this year as first years. If we do get that, and both Brighton and Sussex go over and above by that 5%, then they are theoretically going to become second years next year, and then we're going to have more coming into the second year market. So actually that would benefit the Brighton housing market. Obviously, with the limited stock that we have in HMOs in Brighton, that would benefit the landlords that are there at present, and that may allow therefore those students to overflow into the 1 and 2 bedroom properties that are traditionally kept for the international students. If we don't get that, then I think it's going to be the 1 and 2 beds that are suffering, and they will need to revert more to this traditional residential market, which is gradually creeping up to get closer to what the student market is on rentals anyway. So we're getting closer to those prices. Again, the HMOs that are on the outskirts, so for example, Moulsecoombe, Coldine, etc., they need to make sure that they are the standout properties in their area if they want to make sure that they're the ones that are being let. Traditionally, they are the ones that appeal to the first year students because they're close to the university. But second and third year students want to move closer to the town and have the balance between the nightlife, social life, and the university. So if we've not got those first years, how are we going to attract those second and third years out to the outer regions of Brighton? Price is obviously one, and if it is price that determines where they go, then obviously you've got to be the standout property in that area.
Well, I mean, the thing about price, of course, is, well, I'm assuming that the purpose-built blocks that are going up, as far as I know, they're going to be advertised at a very high rate. So private landlords have got the opportunity to offer not all the same facilities, but quite as, nearly as good, and undercut them.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Indeed. And again, those private blocks are aimed at the international students that come in late. They come and take properties in late August, September, when they start university. They're not looking ahead of the game in January, February, March, etc. They do tend to come in late in the season. Are those private blocks going to wait until those periods before they start trying desperately to attract tenants in? That's the question. Again, it's keeping a very close eye on the market and trying to stay ahead of the game to make sure your property is attractive to tenants as possible, and to make sure you get it let early on. Obviously, again, at the moment, the credit checks are very important. You don't want tenants in there that can't afford to pay. So, again, a very important step.
Right. Okay. Well, that's all good stuff, and lots of things for people to think about and chew on. So thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. So, hopefully we'll be getting together again very soon to have another chat. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks for having me on.